Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, your daily dive into the news. It is Monday, and there is a lot to talk about, starting with this. This TwitchCon safety problem and scandal, it's blowing up right now because you're seeing more and more top creators and streamers and their fans saying that TwitchCon is not safe and you shouldn't go. And a lot of that, it appears to be connected to what happened to Emiru, who's one of the platform's biggest stars over the weekend. Whoa. Right in the video, you see this just massive dude walking up to her during a meet and greet and attempting to kiss her before being shoved off by security. All of which, among other things, sparked a ton of questions about how this was even possible and whether Twitch was taking security seriously. Right on paper, they claim to be, especially because leading up to the event, figures like Pokimane, Hassan Piker, Valkyrie, and Cutie Cinderella all claimed that they weren't going over safety concerns. And after that, you had Twitch CEO Dan Clancy bending over backwards to say that security would be beefed up at the event. And at the very least, you would think that would especially be the case for Emiru, who is one of the only massive creators still going to the event. Right, and then with that, you had many saying it felt like it was only after the clip of the assault went viral that Twitch addressed it, saying in a tweet, "The safety and security of all those attending TwitchCon is our highest priority. The behavior displayed by the individual involved in the incident yesterday involving a high-profile streamer was completely unacceptable and deeply upsetting." With him then going on to say, "We immediately blocked this individual from returning to the TwitchCon premises, and they are banned indefinitely from Twitch, both online and in-person events." Right, and then on top of that, they changed the system to stop allowing people at official meet and greets to bring a +1. But then with that, what you quickly saw were people pushing back against Twitch's statement. You had people pointing to the incident and the clip, noting that in the entire 2-minute, 20-second version of the video, you can clearly see the attacker just walk away. And also, probably the person to push back the most was Emiru herself. Right, not only did she tweet about it, she also went live to talk about the situation, how she feels Twitch failed completely, and how parts of their statement are misleading at best. And so you had things like, according to her, it actually wasn't Twitch's security that stepped in to save Emiru, but her own private security. But also, it's not like Twitch's security wasn't around. The guy had to pass 3 or 4 other checkpoints to even get close to Emiru. It's just that it appears that they stood around during the incident and afterwards. But also, one of the first things that she does do is thank the person who posted the video.
I don't think that Twitch would have put out an official statement if that clip wasn't posted and going viral. And even after the fact that that clip was posted and going viral, as far as I know, the other people who had meet and greets today were not reached out to ask if they wanted extra security.
You also had Emmy confirming a lot of the things that people were speculating about online. So for example,
I was doing my meet and greet and I've seen people saying that it was an obligation given to me, like to be a featured creator and to have my show, I had to do a meet and greet, which is true. I was told that I had to do a meet and greet, but as far as I know, there's some people that canceled. Regardless, I didn't cancel. I thought it was going to be fine. So I show up at 4, I'm doing my meet and greet.
And he also confirmed that Twitch actually did permaban her favorite security guard after he held onto a stalker until law enforcement came at a previous TwitchCon, which was definitely something that shocked a lot of people because clearly Emiru needs security, and just at a glance, it looks like Twitch's response to her effective security was to ban them. And then also a big thing is that Emmy pushed back on the claim that Twitch quickly dealt with the guy. Because 1, it was apparently her manager who called the police and talked with them. 2, it apparently took hours for the guy to be tracked down. And 3, it took Twitch 2 hours to approach Emiru's team about the assault. And
my manager comes back to me and she's upset. She's like, "Okay, I've been talking to Twitch people and I'm really upset because I noticed a lot of negligence around the event and I'm not happy with the way that they're handling it now." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Well, I asked them, like, what are they gonna do about this? And you know what they said initially? They said, oh, well, he's banned from the platform for 30 days. What? And then she's obviously like, hello? Like, that needs to be indefinite. What the fuck are you talking about? Also, that's like nothing to do with anything. No one gives a fuck if he's banned on Twitch or not. Like, we're talking about the convention here. So they changed it to indefinite. Takes an hour for that to happen, by the way. These 2 people are the head of security for Amazon and the head of risk for Twitch.
Right, and with all this, you had Emiru spending a lot of time asking how smaller creators are supposed to feel safe during this if she can't. But she apparently spends tens of thousands on security for these events, and clearly people with 50, 100, or even 1,000 viewers, they can't do that. Even though really, it always just takes one person. They could be in just as much danger with crazy fans. While you had her addressing this in a live stream, I feel like another thing that should be noted, she apparently ended up only spending like a few minutes to calm down before finishing her meet and greet, and then she had to go live on stage for a show. That is not to say that this is even remotely normal. channel, and she made it very clear that this was her last TwitchCon and she'd never be attending again, and that she is definitely pressing charges against the guy. And so with all of that, as you'd expect, there have been a ton of reactions. And so you had things like Taylor Lorenz speaking to Twitch CEO Dan Clancy and asking what Twitch was doing to prioritize safety, and he said,
"The safety of our creators is the top priority. The challenge we face is a challenge in today's society. It's not limited to Twitch. It extends throughout our society. I do think that when you're live streaming, in many ways, since you control your community and you can ban people, you can make it so that those people that you don't want engaging with you and participating with you aren't there. Okay, it's very different. When I use other short form content and people say all sorts of stuff, well, I can't stop that. But when I live stream, they basically don't bother me. Now, what happened yesterday obviously was something that we care deeply about, securing this environment. We're looking very closely at everything that happened there, and I care deeply about Emmy. She's a friend of mine, and so I want to see how we can support her.
Though that response, it felt kind of anemic to most, and it kind of just reinforced statements from people like Moist Critical, who have long avoided live events like this over safety concerns. Right? And now, after what happened, you had him saying,
now, as a result of the assault that Emmy Rue experienced at their event, they are going to be having a stronger security presence at further meet and greets that are scheduled. The question begs to be asked, why wasn't that an emphasis beforehand? You're saying that safety was like your top priority, yet it's very clear, very evident in this clip that there's not a lot of security there. So what are you doing about safety? I don't understand. If safety is such a high priority, where's security? Why, I don't know why it's so lackluster then if it's such a high priority. And again, this is a huge streamer. Emmy Rue is one of the biggest streamers. What does security look like for streamers that aren't her size?
And you also had Charlie there adding that his apprehension about going to events, it stems from Christina Grimmie's death years ago. And he, Emmy, and others have all pointed out how quickly this recent assault could have been much worse. Right, among the many voices speaking out here, you had big creators like Esmond Gold taking the opportunity to say that, this is just another example of Twitch's failings.
The moderation team at Twitch is completely deranged. The advertising team is completely misguided. And the executive team is completely disconnected. At all levels of this organization, they failed. I think this is going to be the last TwitchCon, by the way. I cannot imagine anybody ever even thinking to go to another TwitchCon after this.
With him then going on to point out that Emmy Rue's experience, it's not an isolated event, and that every TwitchCon, it has these horror stories of assaults and groping. And in fact, you had Emmy Rue herself also mentioning this and asking people to send her examples from this past weekend, since she's positive she wasn't the only one. Right, but with all that said, it just looks like Twitch has another PR nightmare on their hands. And so the big question for many is, whether Amazon thinks any of this is worth changing leadership at the platform over. Because the general consensus is that the ball was majorly dropped at the event, and that the promise to take security more seriously, it wasn't real. For now, we'll have to wait and see. And of course, in the meantime, I'd really love to know your thoughts, opinions, and reactions. But then next up in the news today, we need to talk about Trump, Prince Andrew, and Epstein, because there's actually a lot going around with and around the Epstein case. And where we can start is with Donald Trump versus Representative Thomas Massie. Right, and Massie, he's this Republican known for bucking his own party on a few issues, especially with Epstein. And so on Friday, you had Trump calling him, quote, a sick wacko who refuses to vote for our great Republican Party, MAGA or America First. It's really weird. With him then saying in another post that Massie must be thrown out of office ASAP, and then endorsing a Navy SEAL veteran, Ed Galryan, to take the seat. So that also is Galryan hasn't even entered the race yet. But still, you had Trump arguing that Massie has made life very easy for the radical left, and added, unlike lightweight Massie, a total ineffective loser who has failed us so badly, Captain Ed Galryan is a winner who will not let you down. Should he decide to challenge Massie, Captain Ed Galryan has my complete and total endorsement. Run, Ed, run, MAGA. And I'll add for a little extra background that Galryan actually previously ran for state senate in Kentucky back in 2024, though he narrowly lost the primary. And then as far as the here and now, you had Galryan responding to Trump's comments, saying that he was honored by the support and would announce what's next for him soon. But Massie, he took the opportunity to slam the endorsement, calling Galryan a failed candidate and establishment hack. And that energy, it definitely wasn't alone, right? Trump's post, it prompted tons of responses, with most kind of noting that Massie is one of the few Republicans supporting or even leading the charge on getting the Epstein files released. Right? He filed a discharge petition that would force a floor vote on legislation requiring the files to be released. And with that, as we've talked about quite a bit recently, the representative-elect in Arizona will be the last signature that he needs. So there you have Speaker Mike Johnson holding that up. And so that, it's why many are seeing Trump's attack on Massie here as being connected again to Epstein, especially because this isn't even the first time that Trump's tried to take a shot at his seat. And so again, what Trump's doing, it didn't come as a surprise. And actually, Massie wrote this morning about the situation. Dogs don't bark at parked cars. There's a reason some of the world's richest and most powerful people are trying to get me out of Congress. I'm just one of 435 votes, but I bring transparency to an otherwise dark and corrupted institution of government. But that's also not where the Epstein news ends today, especially because more and more excerpts from Virginia Giuffre's upcoming memoir are getting published ahead of the book's release tomorrow. And there's been a lot of interest about this book because she's a prominent Epstein accuser who actually died from suicide earlier this year, but her memoir was completed prior to her death. And now, according to reports in her book, she says that in her years with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they lent me out to scores of wealthy, powerful people. I was habitually used and humiliated, and in some instances, choked, beaten, and bloody. I believed that I might die a sex slave. Right, and that is, you had other reports noting she specifically said she was bloodied after an encounter with a former prime minister who she didn't give name over fears that he might harm her. But also, some reports have said that she previously named Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, in court documents, though he has denied allegations that he raped her. Right, and this also comes as previous excerpts already dove into allegations that she made against Prince Andrew, calling him entitled as if he believed having sex with me was his birthright. And actually, on Friday, Prince Andrew announced that he would stop using his royal title, the Duke of York, amid all this fallout, writing that after speaking with the king, we have concluded the continued accusations against me distract from the work of His Majesty and the royal family, saying I have decided, as I always have, to put my duty to my family and country first. I will therefore no longer use my title or the honors which have been conferred upon me. As I have said previously, I vigorously deny the accusations against me. And that really just being the latest, as he already stepped away from his royal duties back in 2019. But also, I'll say, this news shouldn't be confused with him not being a royal anymore. He's still the son of Queen Elizabeth. He remains a prince and is still 8th in line for succession. And to that, it's why you have many saying, more needs to be done to hold Prince Andrew accountable. Right? And there's a ton of pressure right now on both the royal family and the UK government to use powers that would formally strip him of his titles. And in fact, you had Virginia Giuffre's brother saying it needs to go past his Duke honor and he should no longer be a prince. And then also with this, you have the news that the Metropolitan Police in London are saying that they're looking at claims about Prince Andrew. But with that, I'll say they're not investigating sexual assault claims directly. Instead, they're looking into media reports claiming that Andrew asked his police protection officer to dig up dirt on Virginia Giuffre back in 2011, which would have been just before the Mail on Sunday published a photo of Virginia and Andrew together, with leaked emails showing Andrew allegedly claiming that he gave his officer Virginia's social security number and birthday and suggested she had a criminal record. So you had leaders in the UK calling these reports concerning and saying this is not how officers should be used. And well, for now, that's where we are. We should have more updates soon. Then there's more we've got to dive into today. But first, let me ask, do you ever realize that your car gets more regular checkups than you do? And at least the mechanic knows your name. Meanwhile, that doctor's appointment you swear you'd booked months ago, it's still sitting on the to-do list. And look, I get it. I was that person too, but that's also why I'm so happy to talk about today's sponsor, ZocDoc. ZocDoc is the free app and website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors and click to instantly book an appointment. Like seriously, you can search and compare over 100,000 in-network doctors across every specialty: mental health, dental, primary care, urgent care, all of it. You can also filter by location, insurance, and ratings from verified patients, so you actually get a doctor that fits your needs. Once you find them, you can see their real-time appointment openings and instantly click to book. No phone tag, no hold music, just done. The best part, the appointments happen fast. They often happen within 24 to 72 hours and sometimes even same day. That translates into you could literally finish this ad spot and already have a doctor lined up. I use it. I think you should too. I recommend it to people. It's really just that simple. Well, I love them being a sponsor. I'm also trying to put you off. So hey, stop putting off those doctor's appointments and scan that QR code or go to ZocDoc.com/Phil to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. It's ZocDoc.com/Phil, ZocDoc.com/Phil. But then next up, in the news, being a Trump supporter, it's a get-out-of-jail-free card, and the president wants you to know this. Basically saying it's not wrong versus right, it's right versus left, it's loyalty over reality. Now, the latest to benefit from this is disgraced former Congressman George Santos. Because you had Trump on Friday announcing on social media, George Santos was somewhat of a rogue, but there are many rogues throughout our country that aren't forced to serve 7 years in prison. With that, he pointed to Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal's false and misleading claims in the past that he served in Vietnam and argued, this is far worse than what George Santos did, and at least Santos had the courage, conviction, and intelligence to always vote Republican, with him hitting that in all caps in case his message wasn't clear enough. And adding, George has been in solitary confinement for long stretches of time and by all accounts has been horribly mistreated. Therefore, I just signed a commutation releasing George Santos from prison immediately. Good luck, George. Have a great life. So where we should start here is, well, what did George Santos actually do? That's an important thing for informing your opinion. So what you had was a man who was elected as a representative for New York's 3rd Congressional District back in 2023. Then you soon had outlets reporting that he had made up key details on his campaign biography, including about his education, past work, experience, and religion. But then very importantly, that is not where it ended, because in 2023, a congressional ethics investigation found that he'd improperly spent campaign funds on things like Botox, designer clothes, and OnlyFans. With that then leading to him actually getting expelled from Congress, and in 2024, he then pled guilty to wire fraud and identity theft in federal court, with Santos admitting to lying to Congress, stealing money from campaign donors, and fraudulently collecting unemployment benefits. And then regarding his sentence in April, you had Santos writing that the 7 years he received was a, quote, over-the-top politically influenced sentence and added, "I implore that President Trump gives me a chance to prove I'm more than the mistakes I've made." So now, with Trump's commutation after serving less than 3 months of his 7-year sentence, he's a free man. And as you'd expect, there's been a lot of criticism, especially from his former colleagues and constituents from New York. Right, with New York Representative Nick LaLota, for example, saying George Santos didn't merely lie, he stole millions, defrauded an election, and his crimes for which he pled guilty warrant more than a 3-month sentence. And that, as you also had Andrew Garbarino, another congressman from the state and one who sat on the House Ethics Committee panel that investigated Santos, saying the victims of Santos's crimes still have not been made whole. And with that, you had a guy who claimed that Santos helped him start a GoFundMe for his dog's surgery, and then Santos kept the money, telling the New York Times, "I feel like I got personally stabbed in the gut by the President of the United States. I don't think he even realizes what George did, what he was guilty of." Right, and actually, connected to that, as part of his sentencing, Santos was ordered to pay back more than $370,000 in restitution to some of his victims, along with $205,000 in forfeiture. Well, now Santos has said he'll only do that if he's required by law. The thing is, it seems like it isn't, at least based on the clemency grant posted by pardon attorney Ed Martin, which said Trump granted Santos a, quote, immediate commutation of his entire sentence to time served with no further fines, restitution, probation, supervised release, or other conditions. But then also, in addition to taking issue with letting anyone off the hook for their crimes, the obviously partisan nature of all this has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Because again, Trump made it very, very clear that Santos being a Republican and voting his way was a factor in his decision. And that it's part of a broader pattern. I mean, besides things like the January 6th pardons, which of course are standout, you also have things like the watchdog group Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington claiming that Trump has granted clemency to 16 corrupt politicians, with the vast majority being Republicans, though at least 2 were Democrats. So with all that said, you had several Republicans pushing back against this narrative. And that includes House Speaker Mike Johnson, as well as Santos himself, pushing back, pointing to Joe Biden's pardoning of his son Hunter.
And then there's a lot of people who were upset with President Biden who pardoned his entire family before he left office in an unprecedented move. So pardon me if I'm not paying too much attention to the curl clutching of the outrage of my critics and of the people predominantly on the left who are going to go out there and try to make a big deal out of something like this.
And then also with this, you had Santos claiming that a guy who worked on his campaign and was later sentenced to 1 year in prison for wire fraud was a victim of arbitrary sentencing, and saying that he should have a commutation afforded to him as well. Right, and that is, you had Santos arguing that the sentence that he received was disproportionate, but also saying that his time in prison was a large slice of humble pie, right, and claiming that the experience was so transformative that he would now be devoting his time to advocating for prison reform. And also probably getting back out on the podcast circuit, because he just can't keep this diva down. But then next up in the news, we need to talk about this second round of No Kings protests that went down over the weekend, right? Especially as you had over 2,700 rallies taking place on Saturday, and organizers saying that some 7 million people were marching under the No Kings banner. And they were seemingly everywhere: New York, New Orleans, Chicago, Portland, LA, DC, and on and on. And it included many rallies in smaller cities and even districts that squarely voted for Donald Trump in the last election. We even had international rallies in places like Paris, London, Rome, and Lisbon. Right, and with this being the second iteration of the No Kings protest against Donald Trump and what he's been doing, it was kind of the same, but also different. The first one back in June, it drew some 5 million demonstrators. And now this time around, you had more people, and that included new protesters who joined the fray to stand against new issues that have cropped up since the first No Kings Day. So things including, but definitely not limited to, immigration raids, federal troops in cities, government layoffs, rollback of vaccine requirements, and all the things that are happening and will happen under the big, beautiful bill that was signed into law back in July. So you had protesters saying things like,
"I'm crying for the pride of all these people that are gathered here and all over our country. The pride in the belief that our Constitution means something and that we all have the right to fight for what we believe in. That is what makes my heart happy and sad at the same time, that we actually have to do this."
It's really important to me that America was founded on immigrants, by immigrants, and the fact that they are trying to shut that out and rewrite history is a really big deal.
Rather than abandoning a war against an elusive, perhaps sometimes imaginary foe, we are confronting the possible end of our republic. We are here to tell our lawmakers that what's going on in our government is wrong. They must stop the abuses of this petulant president and his circle of sycophants. No thrones, no crowns, no kings.
Also, I'll say another notable difference this time around were the costumes, because you had a number of people at these rallies just wearing silly costumes, including inflatables. We talked about this on the Crashing Out pod, but it feels like a lot of people are doing this to establish the fact that these protests are in fact peaceful and non-violent. And you had one protester in LA saying it's really hard to call something a war zone when you look at something and it's just a block party and people in Halloween costumes. And then also, people are doing it in response to a viral video of an ICE agent firing pepper spray directly into the air vent of a protester's frog costume. But that's not to say like everyone's loving the costumes, right? That's even resulted in its own controversy controversy. Or you have some saying if you have this inflatable frog or dinosaur, it makes it hard to take the cause of the protest seriously. But with that, I'll say one, this is my opinion, I think that criticism misses the point of why that's happening. And two, the controversy and debate around that, it's pretty small compared to the other things we've seen connected to Saturday's events. Because as you can imagine, Trump and Team Trump had several things to say about the protests. And in fact, part of Trump's response to millions of people across this country protesting his administration, accusing him of trying to be a king, was to share an AI-generated video of him in a crown, flying a jet, spraying sewage all over them. Though that also wasn't the end of it. He shared another AI-generated video originally posted by JD Vance on Blue Sky of him putting on a crown and robe in front of kneeling Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Though Trump said that those posts were meant to be a tongue-in-cheek moment, and he then further responded to the protesters by telling reporters while on Air Force One,
"We're checking it out. The demonstrations were very small, very ineffective, and the people were whacked out. When you look at those people, those are not representative of the people of our country."
Mr. President, besides San Francisco...
No, I'm not a king. I'm not a king. I work my ass off to make our country great. That's all it is. I'm not a king at all.
Right, and that sentiment was also echoed by Speaker Mike Johnson, whose own response included a statement to ABC News saying, if President Trump was a king, the government would be open right now. If President Trump was a king, they would not have been able to engage in that free speech exercise out on the mall. And Johnson then going on to say that the protests were essentially hate America rallies and saying they pushed a hateful anti-American Marxist message, saying it's not about the people, it's about the message, it's about the ideology. It is a dangerous ideology and it is anti-American. It goes against everything that we stand for. And then also this morning you had a reporter confronting Johnson about the AI video of Trump and asking,
to say that the President of the United States over the weekend released a video of him pooping on the American people.
The President uses social media to make a point. You can argue he's probably the most effective person who's ever used social media for that. He is using satire to make a point. He is not calling for the murder of his political opponents.
Right, then as far as other responses from Team Trump and Republicans, it's been a bit mixed. Right, some have dismissed the protests as inconsequential, including White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson, who responded to a request for comment about the protest with the response, "Who cares?" And that is you had Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins posting on X the day of the protest, "Good morning to my fellow Americans who are celebrating No King's Day today. While most of us celebrate this reality on July 4th, you do you." Though this also as you had people agreeing with Johnson, denouncing the protests as un-American and accusing the left of catering to a part of their base that is, quote, made up of Hamas, terrorists, illegal aliens, and violent criminals. Which, I'll just say, that was the news. My opinion, wild, but not unexpected response. One, peaceful protest, one of the most fucking American things ever. Two, this is just yet another example that if you are critical of Netanyahu's government, apparently you're fucking Hamas. And three, yeah, obviously, you must be a violent criminal or an illegal alien if you think that, I don't know, everyone deserves due process. Especially in the face of a president who, among other things, teases until he's really just normalizing the idea of him running more than he's legally allowed. But no, of course, it's a lot easier to just other those that stand against you and say they're crazy and violent and or made up and fake or paid, because otherwise you'd have to deal with the fact that other real Americans out there are freaked out by what's happening right now. But hey, that was the news, a little bit of my take, and of course, I'd love to hear from you. But then next up in the news, will this Israel-Hamas ceasefire actually last, right? That's what you're seeing more and more people asking, is it barely survived the weekend. Though also, survives a key word there, because dozens more were killed in Gaza. So it's been 10 days since the deal went into effect. And under the agreement, Israel still controls more than half of Gaza, and the so-called yellow line is the line behind which Israel has withdrawn its troops. But on Sunday, you had the military claiming that Hamas fired towards its forces beyond the yellow line several times, and saying in one case it killed 2 soldiers in the Rafah area of southern Gaza, and the military described the attack as a blatant violation of the truce. But this also, as you had Hamas's military wing saying in a statement that it wasn't aware of any incidents or clashes taking place in the Rafah area, because those zones are under Israeli control, and they added that contact had been severed with its groups that remained there. And actually, later had Trump seeming to back that up, speaking to reporters on Air Force One last night and saying,
"We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas. As you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that, some rebels within, but either way, it's going to be handled properly. It's going to be handled toughly, but properly."
But before all that, you had Israel deciding to close all crossings into Gaza, halt the delivery of humanitarian aid, and the military also announced that it had launched strikes into the area that the soldiers had been killed to, quote, eliminate the threat, including by taking out tunnel shafts and other military structures. By the afternoon, you had the military widening the assault, saying that it had struck dozens of Hamas targets throughout the Gaza Strip, and those strikes yesterday, they reportedly killed at least 44 people throughout the territory. And that brings the total number to at least 97 Palestinians killed since the start of the ceasefire, according to Gaza's government media office. Because even before yesterday, several were reportedly killed in connection connection to alleged violations of the yellow line. And so on Friday, for example, the Israeli military fired on a vehicle in northern Gaza, killing at least 9 people, including 4 children, according to a rescue service that's part of Gaza's interior ministry. And as far as Israel, you had their military claiming that in addition to crossing the line, the vehicle appeared suspicious and ignored soldiers' warning shots. But then on the flip side, you have many noting that Gazans are confused about where exactly this line is, right? And that's assuming they can even access the internet and figure out the maps. That said, you have the Israeli military now reportedly putting up physical markers along the yellow line to make sure that it's clear, so we'll have to see if that helps. But I also say that as that's not the only way that we've seen violence flaring up around this boundary. Because in addition to tension between Hamas and Israel, we've seen clashes between Hamas and rival groups in Gaza. And that includes an incident that ended with the apparent public execution of 8 people in a public square in Gaza City. With that apparently being a part of what Hamas has called a security campaign aimed at collaborators, mercenaries, thieves, bandits, and those cooperating with the Zionist enemy throughout the Gaza Strip. And connected to that, we know that Israel's been arming several militias in an attempt to counter Hamas. Right now, according to a Gaza expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations, these groups are operating from the Israeli side of the yellow line, from which they, quote, descend on the other half of Gaza, carry out attacks, and then go run back to those protected areas. So the situation on the ground, it still remains incredibly complicated. But as far as moving forward, he did at least have the Israeli military saying in a statement last night that it had begun the renewed enforcement of the ceasefire and saying that it would respond forcefully to any violation of the agreement. And so then also with that, you had them saying that the flow of aid would continue, although that aid, it still may not actually be enough. Right? And I say that because you've got people like an official from the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency saying that while it is a relief that the crossings have reopened, the volume of aid, it's still way below what's needed. And that's actually, as one of the crossings, the Rafah one, it's still closed. And you have the Israeli authorities saying they've delayed its opening in response to Hamas's inability to return the bodies of all hostages. Because as of now, in addition to freeing all the remaining living hostages, the group has turned over the bodies of 12 captives, according to the Israeli government. And you've got Hamas saying that finding and returning the rest, it's going to take time if it's even possible. They're saying that some, they're just buried deep under rubble and they require heavy equipment to extract them. And so in the meantime, that's going to obviously remain a point of contention. And it's just one of several things that could completely collapse this ceasefire. But again, as a lifelong cynic, I am going to hope for the best, but I'm going to expect the worst or the least. To me, and this part's just my opinion, it does feel like the situation has been built to fail, but time will tell.